In 1985, oceanographer Robert Ballard made history by discovering the wreck of the Titanic. It was one of the greatest finds in maritime archaeology. A ship that had been missing for 73 years, finally located 2.5 miles beneath the Atlantic. What the public didn't know, what wouldn't be revealed for years, was that finding the Titanic wasn't Ballard's real mission. The US Navy had hired him to secretly investigate 2 sunken submarines, one Soviet, one American. The Titanic search was his cover story. He was only allowed to look for the famous ocean liner after he finished the Navy's classified work first. One of those submarines was USS Scorpion, a nuclear attack boat that had vanished 17 years earlier with 99 men aboard. A boat the Navy had officially found back in 1968, but had told the public almost nothing about. Here's what makes this story different from other submarine disasters. The Navy knows where Scorpion is. They've photographed the wreck. They've examined it with remotely operated vehicles. They've had 56 years to study the evidence, and their official conclusion is still cause unknown. Why would the Navy send Robert Ballard to secretly examine a wreck they claim to have already investigated? What did they find that required a cover story? And why, after more than half a century, are they still not saying what destroyed this submarine? To understand what the Navy might be hiding, we need to start with what we know for certain. On February 15, 1968, USS Scorpion departed Norfolk, Virginia for a 3-month deployment to the Mediterranean. She was a skipjack-class nuclear submarine, fast, capable, carrying a crew of 99 men. Her mission was routine: patrol, surveillance, showing the flag during the Cold War. By May, the deployment was ending. Scorpion was ordered to leave the Mediterranean and head home. But before she could return to Norfolk, the Navy gave her one more assignment. She was to divert south and investigate Soviet naval activity near the Canary Islands. A group of Soviet ships, including a submarine, had been operating in the area, and the Navy wanted to know what they were doing. This is the first open question in the Scorpion story. What exactly was she sent to observe? How close did she get to those Soviet vessels? The Navy has never fully disclosed the details of that final surveillance mission. What we do know is that on May 21st, Scorpion finished her observations and turned west toward home. At midnight on May 22nd, she sent a routine position report to Naval Station Rota in Spain. Location: about 450 miles southwest of the Azores. Speed: 18 knots. Status: normal. That was the last communication ever received from USS Scorpion. She was expected in Norfolk on May 27th. When she didn't arrive, the Navy initially assumed she was running late, maybe a minor mechanical issue. But hours passed, then a day. No communication, no distress signal, nothing. On May 28th, the Navy declared Scorpion missing and launched the largest submarine search in American history. The search for Scorpion covered hundreds of thousands of square miles of the Atlantic Ocean. Aircraft flew patterns over the water. Surface ships dragged sensors. Other submarines listened for any acoustic signal, a ping, a tap, anything that might indicate survivors. Here's something the public didn't know at the time. The Navy had a secret advantage, a classified system called SOSUS, the Sound Surveillance System, a network of underwater microphones placed around the Atlantic to detect Soviet submarines. SOSUS had been listening when Scorpion vanished, and the hydrophones had recorded something. On May 22nd at 6:44 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, SOSUS detected a series of acoustic events southwest of the Azores. The sounds were consistent with a submarine breaking apart under pressure. The Navy knew within hours that Scorpion was gone. They knew roughly where to look. But they didn't tell the families. They didn't tell the public. The search continued for 5 more days. A search the Navy already knew was hopeless. Why maintain the pretense? One possibility? They were listening to something else. Soviet communications, Soviet reaction. If the Soviets had been involved in Scorpion's loss, their response to the American search might reveal it. This is the second open question. What was the Navy really doing during those 5 days of searching? And what were the Soviets doing while the Americans were looking? In late October 1968, 5 months after Scorpion vanished, the Navy quietly found the wreck. A research vessel called USNS Mizar located the submarine on the ocean floor, 10,000 feet down, about 400 miles southwest of the Azores. The discovery was not announced immediately. When it was finally made public, the Navy released almost no details. Here's what they did reveal. Scorpion's hull had broken into 2 main sections. The operations compartment, where the control room was located, had collapsed. The reactor compartment appeared intact. Debris was scattered across the seafloor. What they didn't reveal was far more significant. The Navy conducted multiple examinations of the wreck site. They sent cameras down. They analyzed the acoustic recordings. They convened a court of inquiry that heard classified testimony from dozens of witnesses. And then they sealed the findings. The court of inquiry's official conclusion, released to the public, contained a single remarkable sentence. The certain cause of the loss of Scorpion cannot be ascertained from evidence now available. They had the wreck. They had the acoustic data. They had testimony from naval engineers and submarine experts. And the conclusion was, we don't know. Either the Navy genuinely couldn't determine what happened, or they determined something they didn't want to say. To understand why the Navy might have classified what they found, you need to know what else happened in 1968. On March 8th, 2 months before Scorpion vanished, a Soviet ballistic missile submarine called K-129 sank in the Pacific Ocean. The Soviets searched for weeks but never found it. The Americans, using the same SOSUS system that would later hear Scorpion's death, knew exactly where K-129 went down. The CIA eventually launched a covert operation to raise the Soviet submarine from the ocean floor. It was one of the most audacious intelligence operations of the Cold War. But that's not what matters for the Scorpion story. What matters is the timing. K-129 sank in March. Scorpion sank in May. 2 submarines, one Soviet, one American, lost within weeks of each other during one of the tensest periods of the Cold War. Some investigators don't think that's a coincidence. The theory goes like this. K-129 sank under mysterious circumstances. Some in the Soviet military believe the Americans were responsible. Perhaps a collision, perhaps something more deliberate. When Scorpion was sent to observe Soviet ships near the Canary Islands in May, she may have sailed into a trap. There's a specific detail that feeds this theory. In 2012, a retired Navy captain named Peter Huckhausen published claims from Soviet naval sources that a Soviet submarine had torpedoed Scorpion in retaliation for K-129. The US Navy has called this theory baseless. They've never acknowledged any Soviet involvement, but they've also never explained why they sent Robert Ballard to secretly examine Scorpion 17 years after they'd supposedly already investigated it. What were they still looking for? If the Soviets didn't sink Scorpion, the most widely accepted theory is that she was destroyed by one of her own weapons. Scorpion was carrying Mark 37 torpedoes, a type that had a troubling history. In the years leading up to 1968, there had been multiple incidents where Mark 37 torpedoes activated unexpectedly. The weapons used a battery-powered propulsion system, and if the battery overheated, the torpedo could start running while still inside the tube. A hot-running torpedo is every submariner's nightmare. The weapon is live, it's active, and it's trapped inside your own ship. You have minutes, maybe less, to figure out how to stop it before it arms itself and detonates. Here's where the acoustic evidence becomes crucial. The SOSUS recordings from May 22nd captured 2 distinct sounds. First, a series of smaller noises, possibly the sounds of a submarine in distress, hatches, air venting, machinery failing. Then, 91 seconds later, a much larger explosion. Some analysts believe that sequence tells a specific story. The first sounds were Scorpion trying to respond to a torpedo malfunction. Standard procedure at the time was to turn the submarine around and point the torpedo tube backward, so that if the weapon launched itself, it would swim away from the boat instead of toward it. But Scorpion was at a depth of around 300 feet when the crisis began. If the crew was focused on the torpedo, they might not have realized how fast the boat was sinking. The larger explosion 91 seconds later could have been the hull collapsing when it reached crush depth. Or it could have been the torpedo finally detonating. There's a piece of evidence that supports this theory. Photographs of the wreck show that the operations department, the front of the submarine, was destroyed by an implosion. The force came from outside in, consistent with pressure collapse. But the aft section shows different damage patterns. Some analysts believe there's evidence of an explosion in the torpedo room, force going outward, not inward. The Navy has never confirmed this interpretation. The photographs are classified, and the Mark 37 torpedo remained in service for years after Scorpion's loss. There's a third element to the Scorpion mystery that makes the Soviet theory impossible to fully dismiss. In 1985, the same year Robert Ballard went to examine Scorpion under cover of the Titanic search, the FBI arrested a Navy warrant officer named John Walker. For nearly 18 years, Walker had been selling classified information to the Soviet Union. Encryption codes, submarine patrol routes, communication frequencies. Walker had access to some of the most sensitive secrets in the U.S. Navy, and his espionage operation had begun in 1967, 1 year before the Scorpion was lost. Here's the question that has never been answered. Did John Walker give the Soviets information about Scorpion? Did Moscow know where the submarine would be in May 1968? Did they know she was being sent to observe their ships near the Canary Islands? The timing of Ballard's secret mission is suggestive. The Navy sent him to examine Scorpion in 1985, the same year Walker was arrested. It's possible that Walker's capture raised new questions about what the Soviets knew in 1968. Questions that required another look at the wreck. The Navy has never publicly connected Walker to Scorpion, but they've also never explained why, 17 years after finding the submarine, they needed to examine it again in secret. Today, USS Scorpion lies in the same position where she came to rest in May 1968, 10,000 feet down, 400 miles southwest of the Azores. 99 men are still aboard, and so are 2 nuclear warheads. Scorpion was carrying Mark 45 Astor torpedoes, nuclear-tipped weapons designed to destroy entire submarine formations. When the submarine sank, those warheads went down with her. They have never been recovered. The Navy says the weapons pose no environmental threat. The warheads are intact. The plutonium is contained. At 10,000 feet in near freezing water with no light and almost no oxygen, corrosion is slow. The torpedoes could remain stable for decades, perhaps centuries. But there's another interpretation. Recovering nuclear weapons from 2 miles down is expensive, dangerous, and technically difficult. Leaving them on the ocean floor is simpler, and it avoids attention. Every few years, the families of Scorpion's crew petition the Navy to raise the submarine, or at least to release more information about what happened. Every time the Navy declines. The wreck is a designated war grave. Disturbing it would be disrespectful to the dead. That's the official position. But it also means the physical evidence, the torpedo room, the operations compartment, whatever's left of the control surfaces and hull breaches, remains inaccessible. The answers, if they exist, are locked 2 miles underwater. In 1993, 25 years after Scorpion was lost, the Navy conducted its last official review of the case. A panel of experts re-examined all the evidence: the acoustic recordings, the photographs, the theories. Their conclusion was the same as it had been in 1968. Cause undetermined. 3 possibilities remain: a torpedo that turned on its own crew, a Soviet submarine that took revenge for K-129, a mechanical failure that sent 99 men to the bottom of the Atlantic. The Navy has never said which one is true. Maybe they don't know. Maybe they do and they're not saying. After 65 years, the families of Scorpion's crew are still waiting for an answer. Robert Ballard found the Titanic. That's what made him famous. What he found on USS Scorpion during the mission that was supposed to stay secret has never been fully revealed. 99 men left Norfolk in February 1968. None of them came home. And the Navy's official explanation for why is that they don't have one.